I'm delighted to welcome Russell Parry to Fin Spotlight today. Welcome, Russell. Russell is the founder and CEO of Kompany, a regtech company based out of Vienna in Austria. And to kick us off, Russell, we always ask to start with, maybe you could just give us a 30-second introduction to Kompany and what you guys do.
Hello, Matt. Pleasure to be here today. Happy to give you a little bit of an overview and talk about Kompany today. Kompany is a regulatory technology platform, and we operate a global network connecting to commercial registers, financial authorities, and tax authorities with one goal, and that is to give our customers direct access to primary source data when they're verifying companies and the people behind, be it shareholders or directors and officers. And with the focus on primary source data, we're fulfilling and helping our clients fulfill the requirements for anti-money laundering regulation in Europe, now also in the United States and other parts of the world.
So a big part of your business is all about, as you said, they're connecting to primary sources. That means company registers. What other kind of sources are we talking about there?
So company registers can also be business registers, financial authorities, licensed companies are also regulated by financial authorities, but also tax authorities, because tax number, the data that is required for a cross-border trade, cross-border payment, etc. And we make that accessible in a very, very easy way via the API. And it can be integrated into banking as a service platforms, ERP, CRM systems. And the primary source data differentiates itself, of course, from what we're accustomed to, which is static business information. Whereby the static business information is very useful when you're doing risk analysis. But when you're doing verification of the entities, verification of businesses, you really need up-to-date, real-time access to the primary sources, and that's what we do.
So you touched on some of the challenges you guys are helping to solve, anti-money laundering, fraud. Maybe you could just expand a little bit on how how Kompany's solution is really helping to solve some of those unique challenges that these kind of regulated entities are facing around those areas.
Yeah, we're solving a real world problem, right? Because when it comes to regulation, usually anti-money laundering specifically is seen as a burden, right? You're a regulated company, you have anti-money laundering rules, they're being tightened, and there's new rules every year, it seems, sometimes even within a short period of time. And to manage the regulation, technology can be very, very helpful. A simple example is when you're onboarding new clients or there's an account opening for B2B clients. Typically, that would take, in the old world, it would take 6 weeks, right? Until all the information, all the filings, everything is uploaded, shared, emailed, what have you. With Kompany's RegTech platform, our clients can do this nearly instantly. And account openings on average have moved from 6 weeks to same day, which is a significant improvement because that also means that the banks or for payment service providers or e-commerce platforms, the time to first revenue is reduced from 6 weeks to same day, right?
We also talked about sort of fraud. That's obviously becoming, well, it's not becoming, but is a big problem for businesses as well, in terms of prevention of fraud and trying to figure that out at the point of onboarding. And you also talked about sort of, it's not just onboarding, but the continual process of monitoring. It feels like you guys have really tried to tackle those problems as well with the solution you guys have got there. I mean, maybe from a fraud perspective and the sort of continual monitoring perspective, how have you seen things evolve, and how are you guys really, I guess, is it the real-time aspect which you feel is the real sort of key differentiator for you there in terms of what you can provide to clients now?
Well, real-time and real-time access to the data is one component, because we're really talking about audit-proof data for entity verification, company verification. And this means that when we're talking about audit-proof, we're talking about data that comes from a primary source. It's time-stamped, and that's where the real-time component comes into play. And the third component here is that the data is not changed. So there's guaranteed data integrity. It's a true copy from the primary source all the way to our client systems. And that ensures not only compliance with AML, but that also means the data is always fresh. That
Mm,
also means that at the point of the account opening or the financial transaction or a review of the client's account, the data is always accurate at that point.
mm,
And going forward, it's also very important to look at the audit trail to say, okay, during the life cycle of that client, or our client's clients in that sense, it's important to know who checked what data from what source when, to make
mm,
sure that over that lifetime, you know, when there are changes to the managing directors or an address change, or maybe there's a shareholder change, that is captured at the time it's happening and
mm.
built upon, and that can then go not into only into the anti-money laundering aspect, but also into the risk aspect in the second step. But we call this perpetual KYB, or perpetual business verification, because that means that there's ongoing and active monitoring. So not just
Mm,
a snapshot at onboarding, or sometimes, you know, where there might be a periodic review 1 year from now or in 2 years, but an ongoing monitoring. And that provides a lot of efficiency gains also in the back office for financial institutions. With perpetual KYB, they can get rid of the backlog that they typically have when it comes to checking their client books. With ongoing monitoring, you actually never have a backlog because you're constantly monitoring and adapting to the changes of the
mm.
clients. At the same time, the specialists on the KYC and AML desks and units can focus on the high-risk clients and automate what can be automated and have additional manual verification where it's required.
I mean, talk about perpetual KYB in this instance, and perpetual KYC, I guess, in more general, something
Mhm.
we're working a lot with financial institutions on. What are some of the challenges you've seen, I guess, from a financial institution perspective of actually implementing those processes? So I guess you guys are on the forefront of going, okay, look, we can provide you that information. How have you seen actual financial institutions respond by taking that information and being able to actually use that, putting in place the rules and maybe some of the challenges around that? Have you seen financial institutions kind of really focusing now on that part of it to transition from that periodic review process to that perpetual KYB process?
Well, there's a few trends that we see in the financial industry. One is the general automation for B2B client onboarding. And we estimate that only about 5% of financial institutions worldwide have already implemented an automated account opening and automated onboarding. And so, you know, it's still wide open. So there's still a lot of opportunity there for us, but also there's a lot of opportunity still for those financial institutions that adapt a automated solution. The other trend that we're seeing is this switch, as you also mentioned, to perpetual KYB and moving from static company information to dynamic, the audit proof and primary source based information. And that, I think, is something that some financial institutions are struggling with because it is mandated by European anti-money laundering laws. At the same time, it also requires a rethink of how the data is used and how it's captured and how it is actually then implemented in the risk models, in the compliance systems, etc. So going from static data to dynamic data also means you have to track where does the data come from, the time stamping, and this requires some adaptation. But one problematic approach, though, I would say, is that today a lot of the manual processes are being digitized, but they're digitized in a way that we're creating, or that they're creating digital twins. So
Mm,
taking a manual process, taking a process that has almost no automation or very little digital components, and just saying, okay, we're going to make it digital. We're going to create a digital twin, and everything is the same. Well,
yeah.
actually, that defeats the purpose, because through RegTech, you have the possibility to take a fresh approach on what is the process, how can we make it more efficient, and by making it more efficient, you make it more effective. So the digital twin approach is really problematic because it defeats the purpose.
100%, and we see that a lot, and we see that sort of the way we kind of describe that from our point of view is that that's kind of your first step into digital. Really, it's like actually just digitizing your previous process. Whereas, what you really want to do is transform your process, leverage new technologies to really transform your maybe your operating model in that sense, or even your organization if you look kind of more holistically. So yeah, we 100% see that as well. And I think interesting to see your view on where the 5% is at the moment, 5% kind of complete at the moment. Interested to hear sort of, there are lots of RegTech solutions out there. You guys have obviously come from a background and grown a lot. What kind of organizations and I guess geography, maybe what kind of organizations in certain geographies can really utilize your solution particularly well? Are there any limits to, okay, this is really well suited to large financial institutions or small financial institutions or Europe, or maybe just give us a bit of background on that?
Well, we have clients today on 4 continents. So our solution is a global solution. Our clients typically are engaged in cross-border activities, cross-border financial services, cross-border payment, but also insurance companies, insurance groups, as well as logistics and supply chain platforms and networks utilize our platform. It's all about cross-border. And if we look at our client base, it's mainly in Europe, but the US is growing very strongly, and also in the APAC region.
I mean, I guess maybe just touch on US for a second, because I guess interesting news over the last few months coming out of there in terms of their corporate transparency, and obviously that I guess will impact or be of great interest to you guys. What's your take on the changes that are coming out of the US at the moment?
Well, we've seen 3 new regulations being announced or written into law, right, in the last, I think, 7 or 8 months. And what this really means is that the US is catching up with Europe. So Europe has been at the forefront of anti-money laundering regulation, anti-terrorist financing, corporate transparency. I mean, this goes back, of course, a few decades too, where the first companies law was already enacted, I guess now 50 or some years ago. But if we look at the past few years, the US was falling behind in regulation, obviously trying to enforce it, but not having the regulation in place. And the US is catching up. So for us, that means that we're ready, because by focusing on Europe and ensuring that we can help our clients fulfill their obligations in Europe, and even achieve a competitive advantage by using technology, we can very easily adapt that for our clients in the United States.
I mean, one of the questions I'm sure you guys get as fundamentally, I guess, a data provider or data automation provider is kind of your coverage of data and how you access the different registers around the world, or as you said, primary source information around the world. What are some of the challenges you guys have come across in terms of, and I guess maybe this comes into some of what differentiates you as well. How have you managed to get to some of those more inaccessible data sources? What are some of those, and what's the kind of still the next steps for you in terms of expanding that coverage?
Well, maybe let me start out to say that today we cover approximately 200 countries and jurisdictions, so connecting into the registers in 200 jurisdictions. The challenges were obviously it took some time to build the network, because we operate the infrastructure in the network as well. But it's a mix between licenses and the local laws that allow or maybe even restrict access. So we've been able to create a very, very broad base of licenses, agreements with the different government registers. On top of that, the technical aspect is different in every jurisdiction. So there is not one standard for a certain type of registers, be it tax authorities or commercial registers. But we built our system in a way that allows us to adapt to every difference in the jurisdictions, and then we baseline it. But there's from an IT architecture standpoint, our clients don't really care. They want to have one API, they want to have one data model, and they want to have real-time access. So we put a lot of time and effort into in ensuring that. And now that we are adding new jurisdictions, and there's some, there's not an API available like for UK's Companies House in every other jurisdiction. So sometimes there has to be a technical direct connection, etc., that allows us to access that. But moving forward, it's all about coverage, of course. So we are expanding our coverage. We've added, I think, 5 new countries just in the last few months, and there is a large effort worldwide by the register world, as we call it, to digitize, to make it accessible. There's generally the trend to make it more easily accessible. But one challenge that we had early on was the different pricing and the charging. So in the UK, obviously, Companies House is for free. In many other jurisdictions, access might be for free, but that's not the norm. The norm really is that you have to pay €1, £1, $1, or what have you, or $10. I mean, some jurisdictions even more. So we also built a mechanism to settle those costs with all the jurisdictions, and our clients get one bill.
Yeah, I think it adds an interesting dimension for the end, as you said, your customer as well, to really start to understand even more the costs of onboarding these clients can be different, right? Depending on how transparent the jurisdiction is, how much they have to go out to a client, how much the register might cost, on top of everything else, people and technology and the rest of the operation.
But if I may add here, our clients do typically see a cost reduction. So anywhere between 50% and 90% in overall cost to onboard a client, and also from the maintenance, so the perpetual KYB and the ongoing monitoring, anywhere between 50% and more in cost reduction, just because there is no backlog anymore. There is also, a focus on high-risk clients. They don't have to staff up. They can maintain the staff, but focus on a different segment of their clients, which can be also much more profitable. So overall, it's not just about cost reduction, but it's being more efficient. And at the same time, this I think is something that's overlooked very often in the business cases, is if you use a RegTech solution to be compliant with anti-money laundering laws, you are also reducing your risk of financial penalties or penalties imposed by regulators. So in the European Union, any financial institution is always at risk of up to 10% of their global revenues in fines and penalties for non-compliance.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, when we talk about business cases, which is, again, something we deal a lot with, as you've already referred to, the time to onboard has come massively down. So from a customer's perspective, you are massively improving the experience of an onboarding, right, as well, and also that time to revenue. So there is a huge opportunity there, I think, on the sort of, on more in the top line revenue as well, from an organization's point of view, which often gets ignored or is difficult to measure as well, which we always, sorry, go on.
Especially ahead of time, right? It's easy always to measure the history, but it's always more difficult to anticipate, what the impact is. But I think it's the mentality is also changing. Say technology and embracing technology allows us to operate more efficiently. Right. And also from a cost perspective, I think that if you look at the overall cost, yes, you have cost reduction, but also the implementation is no longer cost prohibitive.
Right. I mean, through simple, as you said, connect through an API, and it's, that then you get your data as a standardized data model. that should be relatively easy to implement. Although I know it's often not quite as simple, but we've moved moving in the right direction. I wanted to ask about sort of your view on ecosystems, as I know Kompany is a big sort of I think a big advocate of this, and the way you use partnerships as well to go to market, and obviously from your point of view, the way you obviously just simply tapping into that primary source world as well. How do you how do you, for Kompany, what's the importance of partnerships first of all, and how do you guys use those, and maybe talk us through some of your sort of key alliances, just to kind of give us a flavor of how you work with other partners.
Yeah, well, the RegTech sector is very fragmented, right? There's a lot of great solutions out there for specific parts of regulation, specific parts of obligations, and to manage that. But when it comes to the data side, that is really something that's more universal. So with our focus on KYB and our focus on entity information, business information, this can be plugged into different applications, different platforms, into different networks. And that is why we also embrace a partnership model to say, okay, we're focusing on one thing that we have specialized on, and that is the data. And we will help enable workflow automation, onboarding automation, et cetera, with the data. And also help our partners help their clients again to fulfill the obligations, right, from a data perspective. And for us, partnerships are very, very important because there are so many use cases. There's so many different parts that where a RegTech is already beneficial today. And we would not be able to, service every individual use case. So this way, we let the specialists, our partners, work on the use cases where they're specialized, and we enable them with the registered data.
Perfect. And do you guys, use data partnerships as well as I guess, integrating into other kind of automation solutions or workflow solutions? Maybe just give us an idea around that, just to, I guess, to increase your coverage and the scope of what you can give your customers.
Well, our strategy is really to connect directly to the registers and to the primary sources. Obviously, there's some technical providers in some jurisdictions which can also be mandated by the government that you have to use. So we work with such intermediaries as well, but that's a very small number. The integration into the platforms and into our partners, that is where we are. Well, Scottish.
No, okay. I think I got it. Yeah. So you guys actually integrate more so into other partners, so they can utilize your primary source data and expand their coverage potentially.
That's correct. So we have our own application layer built on top of our API platform, but we're also helping our partners to build applications on top of our API platform directly or natively, be it a banking as a service platform, be it other KYC platforms, be it customer lifecycle management platforms who require the data.
I mean, maybe just touching on, the where we are right now in terms of we started talking about industry trends earlier, but what kind of impact have you seen COVID have on maybe the acceleration of adoption of RegTech solutions, but also maybe also touch on, have you seen a massive, from your point of view, the increase in risk that's been posed by everybody going digital and COVID for these financial institutions, increase in fraud or money laundering?
So we did see an increase in requests, but also in the reduction of timelines for implementation of RegTech solutions, and implementation of our platform and our API with our clients, and sometimes also jointly working with other RegTech companies where the launch dates or the go lives are pulled forward because of the COVID and the pandemic. At the same time, there is an increase in fraud, but not because of digitalization, but the lack thereof. So if you look at the C-bill scheme last year in the UK, it opened up, all the doors to fraud. And we had already estimated and worked together with the COVID Fintech group, which we created with some other partners in the UK, and identified that early on, that if automation is not implemented immediately for the distribution of the economic stimulus funds, there's going to be billions and billions of pounds ending up in illicit channels or fraud. And just recently, I think the UK Treasury announced that their calculations are that at least 20 billion pounds have actually been channeled through illicit funds and were illegal.
I think they
legal
thought the
requests.
first 50% might have been fraudulent or unrecoverable, which is a huge number, right?
Well, especially because this is taxpayer money. Let's not forget that these are public funds, right, to support the economy. And it was really the lack of using off-the-shelf technology to prevent, a high percentage. You can never prevent 100%, but at that time, with off-the-shelf technology, there could have already been restrictions and filters put in place, so the levels of fraud would be much less. But now we are where we are, and I think there's going to be a 10-year cleanup now. So that might be a new RegTech or a new fraud angle for some startups listening today.
Yeah, and I think it's still relevant though to some extent, because those schemes are still open, and I think in the UK it was Rishi Sunak said it's going to be a simple form to fill out and not too many checks on forward-looking revenues or any viability or anything like that. But I think the overall lack of checks, as you said there, have created a huge amount of unnecessary fraud. So probably a huge amount of they really didn't look for any kind of checking solution, even a simple one, to at least limit their risk there.
And I think we have to be fair also to differentiate what was, the risk, with economic stimulus, and it might actually never be paid back. But that's the risk, right? To prep up the economy. The other one is outright fraud. And that's really what could have been contained. But looking back, it's always easy, right, in hindsight, to say, oh, it could have been. But I think going forward, the restrictions might actually be increased. Also, the financial institutions might be required to be more diligent and be liable for it as well.
Yeah, of course. So, thinking forward in the next few years, I know kompany is probably coming up to its 10-year anniversary next year, I believe. What does the future look like for kompany in terms of your roadmap over the next few years and your goals as well?
Well, we have a lot planned. So looking back 10 years, we've achieved a lot, and the next 10 years we would like to achieve a lot. And it's all about coverage, staying the course on KYB, staying the course also in helping our clients achieve regulatory compliance in AML. So that means there's an ongoing improvement of our features, adapting to the new regulations that are being implemented, but in a global view, right? So Europe, APAC region, and North America. And as we have 4 product lines today, we are focusing on expanding our capabilities on the analysis of kompany information, because approximately 85 to 90% of kompany information is hidden in PDFs. So how do you unlock that information without just a human reading it? And here we've been working several years on creating technology which combines OCR and machine learning to, obviously we know how to retrieve information, right? Retrieve it, read it, analyze it, make it machine readable, but at the same time ensure that it is still audit proof by also providing the original filings and the original documents always in parallel. And we launched this recently with our product called UBO Discovery. That's Ultimate Beneficial Owner Discovery, where we're able to pull shareholder information on demand and build the family tree within minutes. What usually takes a few days machines can do a really great job in automating that just in a few minutes, and then letting our clients and the KYC specialists then categorize it the way they need it for their internal models.
Mm.
And what we are also seeing is that the need for our services is expanding primarily in the cross-border payment segment. Trailing a few years, so financial institutions obviously adopting quite early to anti-money laundering regulation and technology to manage that. Financial services in general, but payment service providers are now also seeing the benefits of automating as much as possible and moving to perpetual KYB. So with new features and monitoring services, we're helping that industry also achieve compliance.
Brilliant. I mean, I think there's a huge in terms of client coverage, in terms of different types of client, and in terms of the scale of the problem. I think it's an exciting step to try to get that information out of those PDFs. That's a huge a huge area. Having worked with KYC teams for years now, we know that that's a massive thing. Okay, it's great, got the primary source data, it goes into a file, okay, but what's on there, or they have to take it out manually. So it's the next step of automation, and so that's hugely exciting to get to that.
And I would say there's enough business also for the next 10 years, driven by regulation, of course. But there's a lot of data that has been captured and will continue to be captured. And as regulation increases, more data will be captured. So how do you make sense of it? How do you make it accessible? How do you make it easily accessible? And how do you integrate that into existing systems and new systems? So partnering will be very, very important. With specialists and continue to working with specialists, platforms, banking as a service providers who are also expanding their capabilities.
And maybe final word then, what do you see as the sort of future in the next few years for around corporate transparency? As we were talking about the US there, but maybe in other jurisdictions or sort of a deepening of that transparency. How do you see that going over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Well, without making political statements, or trying to make any political statements, corporate transparency is really important, right? On one hand, to create a level playing field for all participants in the economy. At the same time, also to make sure that we can curb illicit activities. So the corporate transparency, I think we're worldwide on a path to increase the transparency. At the same time, there's also the question about data protection of the individuals. So I think that we are already achieving a balance, because with increased corporate transparency, it's all about the entity initially, and then, of course, about the people behind, as I call it. So directors, officers, shareholders. And the priority is on corporate transparency, because there is a higher value by providing corporate transparency, because it ensures a functioning economy. And data protection, though, is not allowed to be ignored. So going forward, regulation, I think, will continue to be on corporate transparency, and it might not only be for the purpose of tackling illicit activities. It might also be that through the COVID economic stimulus programs worldwide, obviously the tax offices are also in need to increase the tax base. So this will also help and ensure that the tax base is not further eroded in order to fund the programs. So I think it's in the interest of the states, but it's also in the interest of those creating a functioning economy that corporate transparency will be increased.
Brilliant. Russell, thank you very much for joining us today. Good luck with all the future kind of builds, and I'm sure exciting times ahead as you start to build those next things on your roadmap as well. Thank you for joining me, and I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to speaking again soon. Bye-bye.